The mountains do not care about your experience or your gear, or the fact that people are waiting for you back at the trailhead. In the high country of Montana, the peaks of the crazy mountains rise out of the earth like the broken teeth of a buried giant, jagged and indifferent to the fragile things that crawl across their skin. People like to think they understand the wilderness because they have a map and a global positioning system unit and $1,000 worth of Gore-Tex draped over their frames. They think the woods are a place to find yourself. But out here in the shadows of the scree slopes and the suffocating density of the lodgepole pines, the wilderness is not a sanctuary. It is a digestive system. I have spent too many years looking into the holes where people used to be. And if there is one thing I have learned, it is that the earth has a way of opening up and swallowing the living without leaving so much as a ripple. It was September in the year 2014. The air in the crazies was already turning that sharp metallic edge of autumn biting into the lungs with every breath. Aaron Hedges was not a novice. He was 38 years old, a man built of muscle and intent, a hunter who knew the weight of a rifle and the rhythm of the high country. He was out there with friends, a group of men who understood the stakes of the hunt. They were camped near Cinnamon Peak, a place where the wind howls through the ridges with a sound like a human throat being torn open. On a Thursday morning, Aaron decided to strike out on his own. He wanted to find a different vantage point, a cache of supplies they had stashed previously. He told his companions he would see them later. He shouldered his pack, adjusted his boots, and walked into the green wall of the forest. He did not look back. He had a map. He had a radio. He had years of experience. None of it mattered. The transition from being a person to being a missing person happens in a heartbeat. One moment, you are walking on solid ground, noting the way the lichen clings to the north side of the trunks, smelling the damp rot of the forest floor. The next, the world shifts. There is a phenomenon that survivors often describe, a sudden and total silence that descends like a heavy velvet shroud. The birds stop their chatter. The wind ceases its rustle. Even the insects go still. It is as if the environment itself has decided to hold its breath. We call it the Oz effect, but that is just a fancy name for the feeling of being hunted by something you cannot see. Aaron was headed for a cache that was only a few miles away. It was a route he knew. But somewhere between point A and point B, the straight lines of reality began to curve. By the time the sun began to dip behind the western ridges, casting long bruised shadows across the canyons, Aaron had not returned. His friends were not immediately panicked. Hunters get turned around. They hunkered down for the night. But when the morning light hit the frost on their tents and there was still no sign of him, the unease began to settle in like a cold dampness in the marrow. They called for help. They started the machine of search and rescue. A machine that is supposed to be infallible. They brought in the helicopters with their thermal imaging cameras that can spot a mouse in the grass from 1,000 feet up. They brought in the ground teams, men and women who could track a ghost through a rock slide. They brought in the dogs. And that is where the story starts to fray at the edges. Search dogs are incredible creatures, their noses capable of detecting scent molecules that have been buried under days of weather. But in the case of Aaron Hedges, the dogs were useless. They would pick up a trail and then suddenly stop whining and tucking their tails between their legs as if they had hit a glass wall. They refused to go further. This is a recurring theme in these disappearances. It is as if the scent simply vanishes into the air, lifted off the ground by an unseen hand. While the searchers scrambled, the weather decided to turn. A massive snowstorm rolled in, dumping over a foot of white powder on the peaks. The temperature plummeted to 15 degrees Fahrenheit. In those conditions, a man without shelter is a dead man. The search was suspended, the mountains reclaimed by the white silence. Months passed. The snow melted, revealing the scarred earth once again. It was not until the following year that the first piece of the puzzle was found, and it made no sense at all. A search team found Aaron's boots. They were sitting out in the open, miles away from where he should have been. Now you have to understand something about boots in the wilderness. They are your life. No experienced hunter, especially one facing a Montana winter, removes their boots. It is a death sentence. And yet there they were. They were not scuffed as if he had been dragged. They were not torn. They were just sitting there, miles across rugged terrain that a man without shoes could never navigate. To get to that spot, Aaron would have had to cross multiple ridges and creek beds in the middle of a blizzard barefoot. It is physically impossible. Then came the backpack. It was found even further away in an area that had been searched multiple times during the initial effort. It was sitting on a rock, positioned as if someone had just set it down for a moment to rest. Inside, his equipment was intact. His water bladder was full. His GPS was there. When the investigators turned it on, they expected to see a trail of breadcrumbs, a digital map of his final hours. What they found was a void. There were no coordinates that led to where the bag was found. It was as if the device had stopped recording the moment he vanished, or as if he had been transported to that location by means of something that does not involve walking on the ground. The cynical part of me wants to say he just got lost, but the investigator in me looks at the map and sees the defiance of physics. The final discovery was the most harrowing. Aaron's remains were eventually found by a rancher on the other side of the mountain range, miles and miles from his original position. He was found in a spot that required him to climb thousands of feet in elevation and then descend into a completely different drainage. He was found near a cache of old equipment, but it was not the cache he had been looking for. He was missing his shirt. He was missing his coat. This is often attributed to paradoxical undressing, a symptom of late-stage hypothermia, where the brain misfires and tells the body it is burning up, causing the victim to strip off their clothes. But paradoxical undressing usually happens right where the person falls. It does not explain how a man in the throes of freezing to death manages to hike over a mountain range in the dark and the snow without shoes. There is a darkness in the crazies that does not come from the lack of sun. It is a weight that sits on your chest when you realize that we are not the masters of this domain. We are guests who have overstayed our welcome. We look for tracks, for DNA, for logical progressions of cause and effect. But the wilderness does not operate on logic. It operates on opportunity. Aaron Hedges was a strong man, a capable man, and yet he was broken down and scattered across the landscape like autumn leaves. The official report will tell you he died of exposure. It will tell you he got disoriented in the storm. They have to say that. They have to provide an answer that fits into a folder on a shelf in a government office. But those of us who look at the microscopic details know better. We know that there are places where the air gets thin and the world gets old, and sometimes something reaches out from the shadows and pulls you in. The boots being found miles away from the body, the dogs refusing to track the impossible distances covered in impossible timeframes. These are not the hallmarks of a simple hiking accident. These are the signatures of something else. Something that views us as nothing more than biological matter to be rearranged. You look at the map and you see the points of discovery and you try to draw a line connecting them, but the line does not exist in 3 dimensions. It is as if he was plucked from the earth and dropped into different locations, a plaything for a force that we do not have the vocabulary to describe. The searchers felt it. The rancher who found him felt it. A cold, creeping realization that the man they were looking for was no longer part of our world the moment he stepped away from his friends. I sit in this chair, and I read these files, and I see the same patterns repeating over and over again. It is never the weak who go first. It is often the ones who are the most confident, the ones who think they know the rules of the game. But the game is rigged. The forest is not a background for your adventure. It is an apex predator that has been practicing its craft for millions of years. It knows how to lure you. It knows how to silence the world around you. And it knows how to erase you so completely that even the most advanced technology we possess can only find the scraps you left behind. Aaron Hedges is gone, and while his family has the closure of a body, they will never have the closure of the truth. The truth is buried in the scree and the snow of the crazy mountains, and it is not coming back down. We like to believe we are safe because we have cell towers and satellite imagery. We believe that if we go missing, someone will find us. But the statistics tell a different story. Thousands of people vanish in our national parks and forests every year, and a significant percentage of them disappear under circumstances that defy every law of search and rescue. They disappear in the presence of others. They disappear and their belongings are found in places they could never have reached. They disappear and the weather immediately turns foul, as if the sky itself is trying to wash away the evidence of a crime. We are not at the top of the food chain when we step off the pavement. We are just another animal in the brush waiting for the shadow to fall. This case is not an isolated incident. It is a single stitch in a much larger and more terrifying garment. In 1999, a young boy named Jared Atadero vanished on a trail in the Roosevelt National Forest in Colorado. He was just feet ahead of a group of adults. He turned a corner and was gone. 4 years later, his remains and his clothing were found thousands of feet up a vertical cliff face, a place no 3-year-old could ever climb. His physical condition and the placement of his clothes mirrored the impossible geometry of the Aaron Hedges case. In 1958, a man named Charles McCullough disappeared in Crater Lake National Park. When his remains were found years later, his socks were inside his boots, but his feet were gone and his body was miles away from his equipment in a location that was inaccessible during the time he vanished. The pattern is there if you are brave enough to look at it.